Hey Tara, hey Nate, hey everyone, just hopping on right now. Thanks for joining. How's everyone doing today? So we're doing the weekly Wednesday lives. This one, like the other ones, is sponsored by RepView. They're one of the leading sources for tech sales compensation data. So, Glassdoor is great for general reviews for companies, but what RepView does is they focus very closely on sales orgs. So you can see very in-depth information in terms of percentage of reps that are hitting quota. They have great breakdowns on company ratings, so like company culture, product market fit, inbound lead quality. So all the things that you would care about when you're trying to evaluate an offer, a sales position at one of these companies. So check it out. It's free. To access it, you do have to add, contribute some data. So I think they require 3 reviews, but after that, you can access all the data that they have here. So this is just a list of, for example, top paying companies and sales orgs. This is within the enterprise segment. There's different segments within software sales or tech sales. So this would be kind of when you're a bit more senior within the role. Are non-compete agreements common in tech sales? Is there a way around? It's not super common. They started phasing them out because they were made I think in California specifically, the courts ruled that they weren't enforceable, so they stopped putting them in. But that said, some companies will still have them in place. There aren't really too many ways to get around it. One thing that people will do sometimes is they won't reveal where they're going once they put in their notice. That's probably the best way to get around it. For example, you don't want to let your employer know that you're going to a company that's listed within your non-compete. I've actually heard of companies reaching out to the new company, threatening legal action and preventing you from starting working there. So best way is just don't let people know where you're going. You can wait 6 months to update your LinkedIn, for example, and then at that point they're probably not going to do anything. And also, they usually don't target people with non-competes unless you're a super senior rep with a lot of insider knowledge. Most of us aren't really in that situation. Thoughts on Datadog versus CDW? Which opportunity would you pick personally and why? Two different companies. Datadog is kind of like a primary software company. They're the ones that are actually making the tech that they're selling, versus CDW is a reseller. So two very different opportunities. I would evaluate it specifically based on the position being offered, because it can vary, and then also what the compensation looks like at both of them. Really looking at how to get into entry-level tech sales jobs. Great question. Yeah, so there's a few different ways to get in. So I have a playlist on my TikTok profile called Get Into Tech Sales. So I've got tips in terms of what positions you're looking for. You're looking for sales development representative or business development representative. Almost all those positions are going to be listed on LinkedIn. I have resume tips, and also in terms of what to expect within interviews. So that's check out those videos. So I recommend going through that, update your LinkedIn, update your resume, and try to apply for at least 4 weeks or so. And if you don't get any traction in terms of landing interviews and stuff, then at that point you can look at a program like Pre-Hired or Pre-Sales Academy. These are 8 to 12 week sales boot camps that don't charge anything up front until you actually land a job. They do a ton of one-on-one mentorship, coaching, interview prep, LinkedIn editing, and they have connections with software companies from a staffing perspective. So they have super high placement rates. We've had a ton of my followers have gone through these programs and had great experiences. So that would be kind of the second step. So first, utilize all the free resources, get referrals, see if you can get interviews. And if you're really stuck, or if you have a non-traditional background, no college degree or something, and you're really having trouble getting your foot in the door, that's why one of those would be great. Are tech salaries actually worth it in California, given housing costs and taxes? I think so. So housing costs, for example, in California is high, and you have your state income tax, but property taxes are actually lower in California. I'm looking at property here in Chicago, and the monthly payment on like a $1 million property in Chicago, you know, would cover actually like a $1.5 million property like in California, for example. So it's different. I would say you do get paid a little bit more in California, but the difference isn't really that big. A lot of companies are paying Bay Area salaries anywhere in the US. And if they do pay more in the Bay Area, it's like a 10% bump. You have a bio degree and little sales experience. Yeah, so the entry-level roles don't require any specific tech or tech sales experience. They're gonna teach basically everything you need to know on the job. You can think of like the SDR role as more of like an apprenticeship. Usually you're in that role for 12 to 18 months before you get promoted if you're doing well. Salary range for that role is 60 to 90K. That's typical. That's base plus commission. That would be like how much you would earn if you hit 100% of your goal. Depending on the company, anywhere from like 40% of reps to 80% of reps are hitting their quota. But even if you don't hit quota, you're still gonna get pretty close to that. A few of my followers have actually, they've gotten entry-level roles just a little over 100K. One was like a couple were at 105K, some of them were at 100K, but the vast majority are gonna be in that 60 to 90K range. Have I ever negotiated my accelerator? So I've negotiated them at a startup. I was at a very small startup that I was working at. In that case, you can negotiate it, but at a bigger place like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, the sales plans are pretty set. So you're not gonna be able to negotiate accelerators because they're not gonna deal with having different accelerator rates for different reps. You know, they're setting those they have a specific compensation team that's setting all of that. But if it's a small startup, you can definitely negotiate accelerators. Let's see. Oh, lots of good questions. Would you leave tech sales and join a VC? I would consider it. I enjoyed the business side. That's why I got my MBA. So I would consider joining a VC. I don't necessarily have like the technical skill set yet for like, you know, evaluating deals and so on, because I just haven't worked on it. But I would definitely be interested, especially also from like a advisor type position too. Is tech sales something anyone could get in? I would say, yeah, most people could get into it just because they don't have specific degree requirements or anything like that. It's more about, do you have like a learning mindset? So one of the most important things if you want to be successful in tech sales is you have to be curious, you have to be coachable, you need to be reliable, you need to have fairly good time management skills. You also need to be like performance driven. That's important too. So if you have those traits and you like learning about tech, but not necessarily like coding, for example, then I think you would do well in it. How long have I been in tech sales? What was my process like landing my first job? So I graduated in 2013 from my undergrad. I started working in tech support in 2014, January of 2014. And then I moved into my first sales role within that same company. I did an internal transfer. It was about like a year and a half into it, I believe. So I've been in sales, tech sales, I guess for about 7 years now. So my process, so there's kind of like, you know, a few different ways that people will get in. You've got people that'll get into sales right out of college. You have people that'll get in with no college background. Then you have people that have been doing sales, but a different type of sales, and they want to transition into it. And then you also have people that have been working at tech companies, but they want to move into like the sales functions. So the process is going to be different for all those different individuals, just depending on your background and everything. SDR base salary is usually 50 to 55K base. Yep, exactly. That's pretty typical range. Do you have to start at the bottom entering tech sales? It depends on your background. So if you have very industry specific knowledge, so for example, let's say you've been in financial services for 10 years. If you apply to software companies that sell to financial services customers, you know, your experience could be pretty valuable to them, since you already know like the customer persona, what they're looking for. In that case, you probably wouldn't start at the bottom. You'd probably start off as an account executive. But if you do, so it's really going to depend on your background and also the types of companies that you're targeting. Is sales development role just straight cold calling at home? Is there opportunity to be in the field? Yeah, so the entry-level role, sales development representative, business development representative, Doesn't really have any traveling at all. It's pretty much all remote. In normal times, not COVID times, you would normally be in an office as well. Usually it's, most of the positions would not be work from home. They want to have you in an office. That way you're next to your manager, next to your peers. It makes it a lot easier to do coaching and mentoring. And it's not just straight cold calling. So it's going to be a mix of both inbound and outbound lead qualification. So in some companies, you might not even be cold calling at all. They just have a lot of like inbound requests, meaning customers requesting information directly on the website, or marketing is sending over a bunch of leads. So in some SDR positions, you're not cold calling at all. Instead, you're following up on these leads that are coming in and you're qualifying them. Other companies have very low lead volume, so you're doing more outbounding, and that would be kind of what you would consider cold calling. And it doesn't have to be just calling too. A lot of people don't answer the phone anymore. It can be emailing or LinkedIn messages. Those are kind of like the two other types of like outbounding in addition to calling. Lots of questions here. So I'm going to try to get to most of the questions. Let's see. The comments kind of lag a little bit. Should we treat SDR like prospecting by calling up AEs, asking for referrals, networking within? Yep, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you're looking for that first job, you definitely want to treat it as like a sales process, and you're essentially the product that you're selling. So that's definitely like the right approach. Figure out like the companies that you want to work at. See if you can leverage like your alumni network. That's like a good way to network and ask for referrals. And then asking for referrals is definitely important, just because the entry-level roles, the first role is definitely the hardest to get because you don't have any relevant experience. And that's where having a referral helps a lot, because it gets your application to the top of the stack. Thoughts on the Salesforce SDR course? I haven't gone through it, but I did see it. It looks pretty solid. It's free, so I think there's no harm in trying it. I've been meaning to kind of go through it and do like a more in-depth review, but it looks like a solid one. It's hosted on Coursera. You have years of sales experience, but for SaaS sales entry level, you keep getting offers around 50K base. Normal. Yeah, if it's for like an SDR, BDR, 50K base, pretty much normal. I started as an AE in healthcare vertical, given your med device experience. Yep, exactly. Yeah, if you have relevant industry experience, you could definitely start as an AE. How long does it take to go from an SDR to AE? Anywhere from 12 to 24 months. It depends on the company. It also depends on your performance a lot. So I made the move in about 10 months. I was performing actually at the top of the leaderboard. We had, I think it was 14 SDRs or so. And I came in and I wanted to like really blow out all the metrics. So we had like an internal leaderboard that tracked our performance. So because I was performing at the top, and also with like the promotion timing and everything, I was able to move from an SDR to an inside sales rep or closing role in 10 months. But more typically, if you're a high performer, it's 12 to 18 months. 3 years into your sales job, not tech sales, what would you suggest? Yep, so pretty much, unless like you have like that very deep industry experience in a specific vertical, you pretty much want to start off as an SDR, BDR. Even though the pay is a little bit lower than AE, you do learn a lot of like really important foundational sales skills that'll help you as an AE. So there isn't really too much of a downside in terms of starting off as an SDR or BDR. Where do you guys find job openings for tech sales? Most of them they're gonna be posting them on LinkedIn. That's for sure like the number one place to look for, I think, for positions. RepView has a specific job section. You could go ahead and check that as well. But definitely LinkedIn. Are these high salaries for inbound sales too, or like outbound? Yeah, so at the entry level, the SDR role, your base is gonna be 40 to 60K. That's pretty much where it tops out at. But when you get to like the enterprise level, for example, this is the level that I'm at, your base pretty much goes up to like 150K base. Then you're on a 50-50 base commission split. So your on-target commission is equal to your base. So you're at like about that 300K on-target earnings mark. Should you get an MBA? I would only really recommend getting your MBA if you're gonna do like a really big pivot, like if you want to get into like finance or something like that. And I would only also recommend getting it if your employer is paying for it. That was a big reason why I got mine. I was working at Google when I started my MBA, and they paid for like 2/3 of it. And I was able to do it while I was still working my full-time job. And I was able to get my MBA for, I think it was like $6,000 out of pocket. So for me, it was kind of like a no-brainer, and I enjoyed kind of all the business classes. How many people actually make that much though? So like these numbers, like the OTE, depending on the company, so the stat you want to look at is percentage of reps that hit quota. So for example, at Big Panda, if you're an enterprise AE, you're at 150K base, 152K base, 306K OTE. So if you hit your target, that's how much you're gonna make. If you exceed your target, you make more than that. That's what like these top reps are. So for example, you're gonna have accelerators. So if you're at, let's say 200% of your quota, typically you're gonna have, I don't know, anywhere from like, 2, 3, 4, 5, even like potentially like 8x accelerators. So you could be at a position where if you wanna earn, 916,000, you might only need to hit like, 250% of quota or something like that to get to that number. But the percentage of reps hitting their quota, this varies a lot by the company. RepView breaks down this information, but usually it's anywhere from 40% of reps hitting target consistently, upwards of 80%. What do I think about Gartner? So Gartner, they're not really a tech company. What they are is they're kind of like an analyst company. They basically provide data and they do analyses on different software vendors within different spaces, and they rank them in terms of their capabilities. And what they're doing is they're selling these reports to executives. They're trying to make decisions in terms of what software they want to implement within their organization. So they're a leader within the space, not necessarily a tech company per se. If you want to hit 500K plus comp, do you have to leave Canada eventually? If you want to make that consistently, probably I would say the pay is a bit higher in the US versus Canada. But if you're at a Google or Amazon, which do have positions based in Canada, you can probably get pretty close to that, especially with stock appreciation. Salesforce versus Adobe versus Google. I would rank them Google 1, Salesforce 2, Adobe 3. Is 1% equity factored the same at most companies? So no, companies will have different equity allocations for their sales reps. So it can vary quite a bit. 1%'s actually pretty high. Most of the time you're gonna get 0.5% or 0.25%. It really depends on like the stage of the startup as well. Do you have to move for most jobs? It depends where you're living. A lot of the jobs are remote and they don't have specific locations. Like I'm based in Chicago, but I could be doing my role from Austin, from California, because my customer is global, so there isn't like a specific territory for it. But again, it depends on the company. Some companies really want you to be within like a specific state or city, and they might have you move for that, but right now, most things are fairly remote. Is it worth dropping out of law schools to join tech sales? Economics major with no technical background. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a lawyer, I would assume you want to be a lawyer. That's why you're in law school. But it could be like an intermediate position there. So you could actually go ahead and target companies, software companies within like the legal space. In that case, like your legal background, even without getting your law degree, would definitely be beneficial there. What's a VC? VC is venture capital. These are investors that are investing within startups. Is it easy to transfer within Amazon to sales? Currently L5, thanks. I wouldn't say it's like super easy, but you definitely can. There is an internal transfer process. So if you're an L5, a lot of the sales positions within AWS are scoped for like L5 to L6. So if you want to go ahead and do that transfer, you need to find like an internal sponsor, talk to your manager, look at like the internal transfer process. and you could definitely make it. Like Amazon's big on internal mobility. Should SDR be paid per deal or percentage of deal? Usually SDRs aren't paid on the deal size. They're usually paid on the number of opportunities that they're generating, which makes sense if you think about it, because the SDR is really, they're not like closing the deals or anything like that. You don't really want to be compensated based on like whether or not the deal actually closes either, because there's just a lot of factors that are outside your control. So almost always your quota as an SDR is based on the number of qualified opportunities that you're generating. And you might have some additional metrics based on like, total value of opportunities, but very rarely are you compensated based on that. I know you probably said this, but what company do you work for and what software do I sell? So I sell cloud, and I'm at Amazon Web Services right now. But I used to, I've worked at Google, sold Google Cloud Platform, and then I've worked at a fintech selling AI and machine learning for credit underwriting. That was a fun company. And then I've also sold cybersecurity and then also test and measurement hardware. So been in a few different industries. Everything you've accomplished so far as a first gen is impressive. This is the level you want to be on. Thanks, man. Yeah, I for people that don't know, so I'm 100% Polish. Both my parents immigrated from Poland in their 20s, no college background or anything like that. They came, my dad got his trucking license. He was a trucker. My mom drove around the country with him. A few years into it, they ended up like starting like a small trucking company. I think they got up to like 8 or something. And now like they're doing like Airbnb out of their place or something like that. But long story short, I didn't have any like connections to like get into like top universities. I went to public schools. I didn't actually do any like tech internships or anything like that. I had no idea how much money you could even make within tech or tech sales. I kind of had to like stumble my way in and figure it out. So that's kind of like a big motivating factor for why I'm so transparent, is I know a lot of people are in like that same position too, where, it definitely would be a privilege to have like parents that are executives at tech companies. Then like, they tell you exactly what you need to do to apply and get into companies and what types of roles you should be looking for and what you should be doing in high school and college. So I didn't have any of that, so happy to share what I've learned with everyone. Amazon interview. How much power does the bar raiser have in the loop interview, hiring manager? The bar raiser is very important. So at Amazon, what they have a principle, a bar raising principle. So what that means is when you're interviewing for positions at Amazon specifically, one of the things that they're looking for, they have a bar raiser, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to identify, is this person potentially a better performer than, I think it's like 50% of the team that he's going to be hired on. And what they want to do is they want to focus on hiring people that are better than average, so that way they can elevate like the whole team there. So the bar raiser is very important. I think in most cases, if the bar raiser gives you a thumb down during the loop interview, then the chances of you getting an offer are very slim. Hiring manager is very important, but the bar raiser is usually you're more senior than the hiring manager. Love that you like EDM. Yep, definitely a big EDM fan. Been listening for a long time. What certs do you recommend for gaining technical experience? It depends on the company and the industry that you want to get into. So if it's like cloud, the AWS Cloud Practitioner certification is a really good entry-level certification to get. So I would get that one. For security, cybersecurity, there's like the Network Plus certifications. How do BDRs and AEs work together? So the way that it works is BDRs and SDRs are at the beginning of the sales process, the sales cycle. So they're the ones that are qualifying leads, generating opportunities. And once they generate a qualified opportunity, they pass that on to the account executives, and the account executives are the ones that actually take that opportunity and they take it all the way to the finish line. So BDR, SDR, beginning of the process, and they hand it off to the AE that takes it from there. So that's pretty much how they work together. Almost always, well, maybe not almost always, but sometimes you'll have like a one-to-one matching with BDR and AE. So some companies I've seen, they'll do that. So each rep will have their own dedicated BDR, or like a BDR might only cover like 2 or 3 reps or something. And in that case, they're gonna be working a lot more closely together. In other cases, they're not really working super closely in terms of like the handoff is, like there might be like a pool of BDRs, like 20 or 30 BDRs, and they're all just like working together, not really covering like specific territories or anything. They're just covering leads as they come in, and then they pass them on to the AEs. So how they work together can vary a bit depending on like the size of the company. What if the SDR is bringing in big names or logos, startups? Yeah, I mean, even if they're, so this is in terms of like, are they paid as a bonus percentage of deal? So yeah, even if you bring in like bigger names or logos, it's still pretty rare to see that a SDR would get paid an additional bonus for those accounts. I mean, it can happen, but at any of the organizations that I've been at, they don't have like that type of compensation structure. Switching to enterprise AE from mid-market, any tips on longer sales cycle? Yeah, I think one of the big tips with the longer sales cycle is you need to be confident in terms of like when the deal is actually potentially going to close. What I often see for like newer enterprise AEs is they don't have a good understanding of what the actual procurement process looks like. And what'll happen is sometimes they'll get the technical win, they'll get the buy-in from the executives, and then at that point, that's when they start dealing with like procurement and legal, and it ends up taking like another 3 months or so to go through that whole process just because of all the red tape and everything that's involved. So what you should be doing is, even from the beginning of the opportunity, you should be spending time and working with procurement and understanding what their process looks like, so that way you can get those like red tape stuff, you can get that going in parallel with the rest of the opportunity. So that'll be like a big tip. Identify early on what you need to do on the procurement and legal side. Do you know anything on customer success specialists, managers, and tech sales? Yeah, it's a very important role. So they're on like the other side of the deal. So you kind of can split up these different roles within tech sales as pre-sales and post-sales. So customer success manager is on the post-sales side. So after the deal is signed, what they're responsible for is they're responsible for customer onboarding, and then also maintaining the longer term relationship with that customer. Usually, once the deal is signed, the account executive does like a handoff to the post-sales team, and they're not involved with the customer. At that point, they're almost always focused on bringing new customers onto the platform. And then customer success managers, they're responsible for managing those existing customers and also doing renewals. Taking a lot of L's in the interview process, how can you stand out? Great question. So a good way to stand out is, honestly, you got to do your homework. So and be confident. Those are 2 big things. So when I say do your homework, you should have a pretty good understanding of what the company does, their background, their products. You don't need to be a technical expert, but you should know what their product portfolio is, who their main customers are. Another thing that can help you stand out is have like a 30, 60, 90-day plan. So demonstrate that you've thought about like what you're going to do to ramp up your knowledge within the space. So I've had that question asked a lot during interviews, like, well, what is your process to understand the product and get up to speed? Because not every company is going to have like a very in-depth onboarding process. In some cases, in a lot of cases, it's kind of like up to you to determine where your knowledge gaps are, and it's up to you to find out, where that information is. So especially at startups, they're not going to have a lot of like training materials. Instead, you're going to learn a lot from shadowing other folks within the company, and then also utilizing like outside resources to understand the industry. So I'd say those would be some of the big tips there to stand out. What do you do if you don't have a bachelor's and you want to get in? So look at my Get Into Tech Sales playlist. I've got a bunch of like free tips there, videos in terms of like what positions you're gonna be looking for on LinkedIn. Take a look at that. Do that for like at least like 4 weeks. And if you don't get any traction at that point in terms of like landing interviews, then you could look at a program like Pre-Hired or Pre-Sales Academy or Elevate. Those are just a couple of like the many sales boot camps that are out there. Those are linked in my bio. You can go ahead and check those out. It's like an 8 to 12 week program. You can do it part-time while you're still working your full-time job. They don't charge anything until you land a tech sales position paying at least $70K a year. What are good questions to ask and buzzwords to say in an interview? So great questions to ask during a sales interview. So one of the most powerful questions that you can ask would be, tell me about some of the more successful reps on your team and what characteristics do they have. Sales managers love to kind of brag about like their top performing sales reps. So that's a great question to ask. You can also follow up that question with what are some of like the pain points or blind spots that currently exist on your sales team, and then so that's a good question, because then the sales manager will then basically specifically tell you what they're looking for in the sales reps that they're hiring. So you can take that feedback and you can use that to kind of like modify your future questions or future answers during the interview process. And then buzzwords. I'm not really a fan of like buzzwords, but one other big tip for interviews is try not to say we when you're talking about like prior accomplishments that you've had. So a lot of times you'll be working on different projects at prior companies. You're going to be talking about those when they ask you questions like, tell me about a time when you had to face a difficult situation or something like that. When you answer those types of questions, you want to focus in terms of what was your specific impact and what did you specifically do in those situations. So avoid using the word we, use the word I. That's actually a big thing within like the Amazon interviews. Have you heard of the tech podcaster Tess Tickles? I have not heard of that podcaster, but you can send me a message on that one. Switch from med sales to tech sales, good, bad. I've had actually a few people, so I think a good way to kind of think about that question is, I don't know anyone who's switched from tech sales to medical device sales, but I know a good amount of people that have made the switch from medical device sales to tech sales. So I think that in itself probably tells you kind of what the general sentiment is. But in general, from what I've heard from the medical device sales field, I haven't been in this field, but I have a biomedical engineering background. I thought about going into medical device sales, but what I learned is that the hours can be quite a bit longer than they are within tech sales. You're gonna be spending a lot of time within the operating room with the doctors. Work-life balance is not as great as it is within tech. Benefits aren't as great. You can still earn a lot of money within medical device sales, but the pay ceiling is higher within tech. Started a SaaS public sector role, a lot to learn. Any advice? Yeah, best advice is ask a lot of questions, do a lot of like networking internally, but really just ask a lot of questions. A lot of processes that you'll find within organizations didn't really have like a lot of thought put into them, especially if it's like a smaller startup. So when you ask like these types of questions, they're actually, valuable to the company, because what it does is it just forces the leaders to kind of rethink the rules and policies that they have in place. In some cases, these policies might actually slow down the overall sales process. What type of product do I sell? I sell the cloud at Amazon Web Services. Tom, thanks so much for doing this live, helping us all so much. Yeah, happy to help. And then I'll be posting this live like I do all my other lives. I post them up on YouTube. I have a direct link to the playlist on my bio. I added that. I have like the link to the YouTube channel, but I specifically added like a button to go directly to the live replay playlist. You're a third-year med student and you're not a fan of it. What would you do in your shoes? Well, it's a tough position to be in, but on the bright side, it's better to kind of be in that position now versus 6 years down the line when you're in like residency. So I think a lot of people fall within the trap of the sunk cost fallacy. A good example of that is you're watching a movie and it really sucks. It's a terrible movie. You're 40 minutes into it, but most people will go ahead and just finish it out because they figured like, well, I already spent 40 minutes watching it, might as well finish it. But realistically, like if you don't like the movie, then there's no point in finishing it, right? You're pretty much, it's unlikely that you're going to like it at the end of it. So if you're a third year med student, I think it'd be, if you're already having like doubts, it probably would be a really good time to really evaluate if this is the path you want to go in. I mean, you've invested 3 years, but there's still quite a bit ahead, additional debt that you'll accumulate. So I think you just need to do some self-discovery, interview. I think a good way to kind of like evaluate like what do you want to do with like your future career and everything is through interviewing folks within that space. So I'm sure you've already done it, but shadowing different doctors, that can help kind of quell any concerns that you have. But you can also ask to like shadow and network with folks within like the tech industry or other options that you're exploring. So I'll go ahead and probably do that. How many hours a week do I work? It depends. Like this past month has been a little bit more busy because I'm also juggling a lot of other things on the side. It's been like 50 hours, but some weeks it's as low as like 30. So it kind of depends. Right now we just wrapped up a bunch of account planning. Lots of good questions here. Let me scroll back up again. How important is networking within for a promotion? Very important. So another mistake that people make early on in their careers is they wait around for a promotion. They think that if you just do a really good job, you're gonna magically get the promotion 1 or 2 years down the road. In reality, you need to basically be your own best proponent. So almost immediately, once you start working a new job, you should have like a separate Word doc on your computer where you're tracking all of like your key accomplishments. And then you should also have a very good understanding in terms of what characteristics they're looking for a high performer, for like the next level role that you'd be looking for. And I also recommend having like at least like quarterly like career focused conversations with your manager. Within at that first meeting, you should make it clear that you do want to get promoted to that next level. Not everyone wants to get promoted super fast. Some people are just happy staying within that current role, and there's nothing wrong with that. You kind of have like two different types of folks within corporate. You have the ones that are kind of like on the rock star path where they're getting promoted in rapid succession every 1 to 2 years, and they kind of move up the ladder. And then you have folks that'll maybe get promoted, 2 levels up to like senior level, and they kind of like stay at that level, and that's okay. Companies need both individuals. So if you want to be on that promotion path, you need to take ownership of getting promoted. So go ahead and do that. Work with your manager. Say that you want to get promoted. Ask them specifically for what you need to do to demonstrate readiness to get promoted, and then track your progress within your internal spreadsheet. That way, when it comes to like the yearly review cycle, you already have like your document and your business case for that promotion. Currently a mortgage loan officer, do you think sales skills can transfer to AE position? Yeah, a lot of like the core selling skills in other sales positions will definitely transfer over to being an AE. Do I know any healthcare tech companies? There's a bunch. I mean, you could, and there's always new ones coming out too. If you're trying to identify like good ones to start at, search for tier 1 VCs. That'd be like Sequoia or Excel, for example. You can literally search tier 1 VCs, and then you can go ahead and see what startups those VCs have funded. And a good entry point is like a Series B or Series C startup that's funded by one of these tier 1 VCs. What that's going to do is that's going to like eliminate a lot of the risk that you would have joining like an early startup, but also maximizes like your upside. Will hardware sales force you to start over if you want to do SaaS at other companies? It depends. But like if you're selling servers, that would probably actually be a good background to target like cloud companies versus SaaS. How do you land a CSM role? Is this a good way to get into sales? So landing a CSM role, pretty similar. You're going to do a lot of like networking, try to get referrals. If you want to get into sales, I would just go straight for the sales role. I mean, you can definitely go, become a CSM and then do an internal transfer. But in my opinion, it's best to kind of cut out that middle step and just go ahead and target sales right from the get-go. What's the best degree to go into that would merge into with this area, and what exactly are you selling? There isn't necessarily like a best degree, except computer science. I would just say in general, computer science is by far probably like the best undergrad degree to get, just because it's most transferable. You can become a developer, you can become a product manager, you can go into technical sales, a lot of different options there. What am I selling? I'm selling cloud, but within tech sales, you could be selling databases, you could be selling machine learning tools. There's basically you're selling software to other businesses. So it's B2B sales, business to business, as opposed to business to consumer. Business to consumer would be like car sales or insurance sales, where you're selling to individuals. So very different. There's no like high pressure sales techniques. The sales take longer. The deal cycles are longer just because you're potentially selling multi-million-dollar contracts. There's a lot of stakeholders that are involved. They're doing technical evaluations. So as opposed to like a B2C sale, like a car sale, that you can close that within, a couple hours. Someone comes on the dealer lot, you can go through, qualify them, test drive, go through financing and have them sign and drive off with the car. You can do that within a couple hours easy. And software sales, tech sales, usually it's like a couple months, upwards of a year in some cases, to close these big deals. What if a BDR might not want to be an AE at their company? Do they have to start over if they move? No, not necessarily. And not every BDR wants to be an AE, for example. So like when I was at like the first company that I was at, I think like about like a third of the SDRs or the BDRs, they went into non-selling roles or direct selling roles. Some went into like product, other ones became product specialists. A few moved into like the post-sales support roles. Procurement and enterprise is a pain. Yeah, procurement is a pain for sure. In some cases, procurement can easily push a deal out like a quarter, if not longer. Do you sell high ticket or low ticket products or services? I'll classify it as high ticket. So for example, within cloud, 8-figure contracts are not uncommon. 9-figure contracts happen for sure too. What does someone that is head of sales Mid-Atlantic Enterprise do for cloud sales? So for the head of sales title, they're basically a sales manager. And they have a team of sales reps that roll up to them. Usually they have about like 8 or 10 sales reps that roll up to them. Google versus Amazon for SMB AE comp. It's pretty similar. The big difference between Amazon and Google comp is how they do stock. I think the stock structure, in terms of like the refresher policy, is a bit more favorable at Google versus Amazon, but the overall pay is pretty similar. Do you have an expense account? Yeah, you do have an expense account. So when you go out to travel for customers, you'll be expensing flights, hotel, meals, take the customer out to dinner, go out to like sporting events or something. People will do that. What's the typical cold call email quota per day for BDR, SDR? It varies by company, but it's usually between like 20 to 40 touches per day. So you're going to be working leads. So a lead would be an individual at a company, and there's different like cadences that you can use, but typically you're going to be like reaching out to each person at least like 7 to 10 times before you go ahead and like mark it as an unqualified lead. And you're going to have like a schedule. So you're not going to go ahead and like call that person 7 times in one day. Instead, you'll do a call or email. You'll wait like 2 or 3 days, and you'll have like sales tools that'll help you automate these flows. But so for like a typical day, you'll be doing a combination of emails, LinkedIn messages, and calls, and you'll be doing like a total of like 20 to 40 per day. What's up, man? It's Matt. Did you happen to check out my resume? Matt, yeah, I think I saw in my inbox. I will get to it when I get off of here. Please post on YouTube. Great episodes. Yes, I will definitely be posting this on YouTube. What level is head of sales for Google Cloud? So head of sales would be either like a L6 to L7 at Google. And then if it's like a director position, that's L8 and L9. How much does coming from software engineer role help? Very helpful, especially if you're targeting like the more technical roles within tech sales, like a sales engineer position. A lot of the sales engineers have a software engineering background, so it'd be extremely helpful to have that. If you don't have a bachelor's and you want to get in, don't worry, it's not needed. A good option actually for people with like non-technical backgrounds or non-degrees is like some of like the sales training programs like Pre-Hired or Pre-Sales Academy or Elevate. Those are in the bio. You can check those out. Am I sponsored by RepView? Yeah, RepView is sponsoring these weekly lives, so they're great. I get a lot of like sponsorship requests, but I'm extremely picky in terms of like who I work with because I don't want to be like just pushing a bunch of crap or anything like that. So RepView is great. I was actually using them in my videos before the sponsorship, so super great. The team is great, a lot of great data. They've got a lot of exciting stuff in the pipeline too. Have I heard of Elastic? I have. I think I interviewed there 2 or 3 years ago, so they're a pretty good company to work for. Moving from an AE at a small startup to unicorn SaaS company as an enterprise SDR. Any tips? Well, congrats. Sounds like it's a good move. So my tip there would be definitely try to get promoted as so you're going from an AE to an enterprise SDR. So because you have like AE experience, I would go ahead and like have like a personal goal of getting promoted within 12 months from an SDR to an AE. So as soon as you get started, work with your sales manager, come up with like a plan to get promoted within that timeline, make it clear, and you should be able to make it happen. How would you compare your startup sales experience versus the corporate tech experience? So 2 very different experiences. So I've worked at, very big companies, like Amazon's one of the biggest, I think it is like the biggest company. And then I've worked at very small startups. Like the first one that I worked at, I think we only had like 20 or 25 or so individuals. So the biggest difference between being like at a small startup versus a big company is the amount of resources they have available. So at a startup, you kind of have to be, you're a bit more scrappy. You're not going to have like all the marketing and sales support that you're going to get like at a really big company. You also spend a lot more time trying to build credibility for yourself and for the company. When you're selling at a place like Amazon or Google, everyone already knows what Amazon and Google is. There's already a lot of trust in the name. Versus if you're selling at a small startup, oftentimes you're starting off the conversations with giving a history of the company, history of the founding team, and then like case studies and customers, success stories are especially important at a small startup. But one of the big benefits of being at a startup is oftentimes you can start working on bigger deals much faster. You can get promoted quicker at a smaller startup versus a big corporate company. Tom, love watching your videos. You're an expert in tech. Do you think Facebook will exist in 5 to 10? I don't see them going anywhere, especially within 5 to 10 years. They're big. One of their big advantages is they have a very strong engineering team, and they have other products too. So I know like Instagram, for example, is still an extremely popular platform. Even though Facebook usage has been going down, Instagram has been going up. They're still innovating. I don't know if like maybe Facebook itself might get phased out in 5 to 10 years. We'll see if something else could get replaced with like Meta, the metaverse, and everything else that they're working on. But the company itself will definitely still exist in 5 to 10 years, I would say. Thoughts on joining ZoomInfo as an account manager? It's funny. I think one of like the recruiters reached out to me from ZoomInfo. They seem pretty solid. They have a good rating on RepView. So tips for a new SDR in a struggling territory with all new reps. So that's definitely tough. So one of the best tips, I guess, in terms of like being like as a new SDR in a struggling territory is you really need to narrow down what your daily activity goals should be. So you're going to have like a specific quota for number of opportunities that you're generating. So you definitely want to narrow down in terms of like what your daily activity is going to be. So try to utilize like the historical data. Your manager should provide this to you, but you need to look at like what's the conversion rate from leads to opportunities, average number of touches to go from a lead to an opportunity, and then you work backwards from that number to find out exactly how many calls and emails should you be doing on a daily basis. And sales at the end of the day is a numbers game. So the consistent rep is almost always going to outperform the rock star rep, especially within tech sales or software sales. So focus on volume. That's going to be important. Don't sacrifice quality, but volume is very important. Figure out what that volume is. And as long as you're consistent, you should do well. The bar is fairly low. I think you'll find that. How long should you stay as an SDR? I would say you should try to get promoted within 12 to 18 months. Much past like 2 years, you really start to plateau in terms of what you're learning within the role, and that's when you can really be susceptible to burnout. How to land an SMB role from AE role from SDR? Great question. So easiest way and the most direct way is to go ahead and do an internal promotion. So within the same company, it's going to be pretty hard to land an SMB role, AE role with only SDR experience if you're applying externally. So definitely try to get promoted first. Even if you want to switch companies, it's almost always recommended get promoted first as an AE and then jump ship, so that way you don't have to start over as an SDR again. But I talked about this earlier. The best way to get promoted is you gotta work closely with your manager. So it's not enough just to be a high performer. You need to make it clear that you want to get promoted from an SDR to an AE. So work with your manager, come up with like a promotion timeline and a list of like achievements and metrics that you need to hit to show that you're ready to get promoted. And then at the same time, you should also start networking with the SMB AE manager and start. You want to attack it from both fronts because there's two factors that come into play in terms of like getting promoted. One, you need to show that you're ready and capable of doing the role that you want to get promoted into. But two, it's also like a timing thing as well. There needs to be headcount available on the SMB team to get promoted as an AE. So you want to try to attack it from both sides, so that way you can get promoted in a shorter time period versus longer. Funny you mentioned account planning. That's what you're currently selling, account planning software. Yep. Account planning is a big area right now. What about sales engineer salaries? Sales engineers are pretty close. Usually they have like a higher base, like at the enterprise level, sales engineers will get bases as high as like 200K. And then the commission is lower. So enterprise AEs are on a 50-50 split. Sales engineers, usually their on-target commission is like 40 to 60% of their base salary. Can you become an SE without a technical background? You can. It's a little harder, but if you have like relevant certifications, that can help. If you go through like pre-sales academy, that program is actually specifically aimed for people who want to become a sales engineer. So that's actually a good option. I think they have like a 90% placement rate, and they mostly focus on people with non-traditional, non-technical backgrounds. Why don't I have a Patagonia vest on? Yeah, so Patagonia, in the middle of the pandemic, they changed their corporate policy where they no longer will create and sell corporate apparel to tech companies. They thought it was like wasteful. So that's why most people are wearing like Arc'teryx and stuff. I bought this myself, but I have Patagonia, but it's kind of not as fashionable as Arc'teryx is in the tech space, at least. Just got a deal stolen by sales. You're in CS and this happened before. Is this a normal thing? So it sucks that happened. Usually it shouldn't be a thing. Usually there's a clear differentiator in terms of sales would only be compensated on selling to new customers. Once they're an existing customer, like for example, usually it's something like sales reps can get quota for new accounts that they land, as well as any deals that come in within like the first 12 months, because there are some upsell opportunities. So it definitely could happen. Like, let's say if they just sold the customer and then the customer realized that, or they were undersold, for example, and there's additional licenses that they need to get. In that case, it's kind of like a gray area, because it's not necessarily like a renewal. It's kind of more of like a customer wasn't properly qualified. We didn't sell them like the right license count. So if it's that situation, it's not that uncommon. But if they're already an existing customer for a year, sales definitely should not be like stealing opportunities and getting credit for that. What's the average SDR base salary? Average is 40 to 60K with like a 60 to 90K OTE. That's kind of like pretty typical. Would you rather go AWS mid-market or enterprise AE? Enterprise, that's my preference, just because it's bigger deals, it's more strategic, lower volume. What's my opinion on IBM's Summit Sales? I've heard their program is pretty good. That's one of the things, like for people that are just starting out, I usually recommend bigger companies that have like pretty thorough onboarding and sales training programs, because when you're first starting off in your career, you want to focus on like building like those core skills. And a lot of like the professional sales programs, sales training programs, they're only available through these big companies. Like, they don't sell sales trainings for the most part to individual reps. So if you're at like a small startup, your training and onboarding is basically going to be limited to whatever your sales manager does. And in some cases at a startup, sales managers are already stretched thin, and they're not going to be spending a lot of time like training and developing you per se. You're kind of expected to know what to do and to figure it out yourself. So how much volume activity do you think is good? My firm is 50 a day spread through calls, emails, tasks. Yeah, 50 is not bad. It can range anywhere from like 20 on the low end. It depends on like how long the sales cycle is and how big the deal size is. But 50 seems reasonable. How do you feel about companies that fire sales employees for not meeting quota? So, sales is a performance-based role. So the reason why it pays so much is because it's very easy to kind of measure your performance. It's pretty objective, meaning, your performance is basically your quota. There's other metrics that are going to measure you against, but if you're not hitting quota, it doesn't really matter what else you're doing, because that's kind of your main, responsibility. As opposed to like other roles, like software development, for example, your performance is a bit more subjective in terms of like your overall contributions and like the value of those contributions. So sales reps being fired for not hitting their quota, it's very rare, almost impossible, that you would get fired for missing quota for one quarter. Usually you have quarterly quotas. But if you're consistently not making quota, let's say if you haven't made quota for the entire year, and but the rest of your team is, then you're definitely gonna be put on the radar. You might be put under like a PIP, a performance improvement plan, or you just get fired. Definitely happens. I think it's pretty justified. As long as like if you have like 4 quarters, you should be hitting quota at least one of those quarters. But it also kind of just depends on what other circumstances there are. Like, for example, at the beginning of COVID, everyone, all the customers kind of stopped buying. So it was kind of like a free pass for everyone there. But great questions, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. But if you guys have any other questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I'm going to be posting this recorded live session. So over this past hour, this will be posted up on YouTube. It usually takes like a day for TikTok to process the recording. Then I'll go ahead and get it posted on there. If you have like a non-traditional background, not technical background, and you want to get into tech sales, look at my Get Into Tech Sales playlist on TikTok. I have a bunch of videos categorized there in that folder. It's between my bio and the videos. There's that little section there with the playlist. And then if you're not having any luck, and it's been like 4 to 6 weeks, you've been trying really hard, you've applied to like 50 different positions, you haven't got an interview, then in that case, you probably would be a good fit for doing a program like Pre-Hired or Pre-Sales Academy. These are tech sales boot camps. They don't charge anything up front, and you can get a tech sales position in 8 to 12 weeks. You can do these part-time. And again, they don't charge anything until you actually land a job. They have like some sort of like guarantee. where you don't pay anything until you're making at least 70K a year. So great option. We've had a good amount of people go through those. They've all had great experiences. Happy to answer any like in-depth questions that you have on that. And then you can also join like the Discord community too. I think we have like 3,000 members on there. So check that out. Thanks everyone. Have a great night.